Greetings and happy holidays, YouTube! This is the last video I will be making this year and for the decade, before YouTube shifts its format into the new direction that will affect the way that we make content and how said content gets views and so on. So I'm going to do everything that I can to make this video really count. And say hello to my little kitty in the background. The subject for my final video here is how to respond to the whole "for kids" anecdote. The positive news is that the mindset that kids deserve our best instead of our leftovers is quite popular nowadays, more than some may even realize. And while it's true that there are still crap productions just made on a whim just to scam parents out of their money, there is at least one other that is a labor of love made by people who want to appeal to all ages. The downside, however, is that the mentality that the medium of animation is still classified as a genre, and a kids genre at that, never seems to go away, at least in Western culture. This also easily applies to how forms of entertainment like video games still seem to be trapped under the guise of being aimed for kids, or at least primarily for teens. There have been several speculations as to why this may be, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, from the creators and distributors trying to maximize their profits via merchandise and family-friendly marketing, to the variety of tropes that the bulk of animated features, shows, and games tend to fall into. And not to mention the various medium incarnations that they are subjected to, i.e. adaptations, remakes, and such, which are especially present in animation and video games. It's really hard to pinpoint what the root cause of all of it is. We can point to certain historical touchstones like the advent of television and how that established the basic as family-friendly as possible mentality, but I don't think that's where we can place all the blame. Some say that it's certain trends that are hurting the medium, even some trends like parents in animated films being dead, or twist villain, or buddy road trip plot, or a coming-of-age plot. But I find the problem with that mindset is that it becomes an anecdote in and of itself, and that some of these tropes reflect individuals' personal tastes rather than the problem with the medium as a whole. And video essayists are very emphatic about their opinions in what mainstream movies, shows, and games should or should not do to the art form justice. And the thing is that this just leads to entitlement, making fans of animation and the medium not interested with what is being done justice in the eyes of the general public, but rather with our perception of what it should be. A lot of reviewers I once had great respect for have fallen into this trap, especially this year. We see and hear talk all the time on the internet about how a lot of recent animated features have just been too relying on safe formulas and emulated in the past too much to appeal to people's nostalgia. But the thing is, just because you don't like something personally, or don't see it as perpetually advantageous, doesn't mean there isn't value to it, or that it's tarnishing the art form that you think it is. Let's refer to the genre of musicals for a minute, as it too has often been dismissed under the stereotype of being for kids, or something that a lot of people just don't like. Moulin Rouge is credited as the movie that reignited the general public's love for musical movies after decades of the trend being underground. And the Les Miserables movie adaptation even helped give the musical genre a hand so that we could get at least one movie musical just about every year that followed. And those are movies that are loved by many for sure, but are hated by many others who say that the films are too pretentious and full of themselves, don't know what they're doing, and are not as clever and innovative as the makers think they are. But in spite of the haters, these movies were topical trendsetters for their time. Likewise, there are titles in animation that, despite their success and popularity among the general public, have come in under fire for a lot of similar criticisms from critics and analysts who say that they are not being innovative enough, don't break the mold, and, if they're especially popular as Frozen, don't deserve the success they've received and/or are a bad influence on the medium. I've been hearing talk all across DeviantArt from people who praise Netflix's Klaus and how people want it to be the next revolutionary thing that takes the medium of animation to the next level, just as much as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was in their eyes. But while I myself do find both of these movies to be of excellent quality overall and somewhat revolutionary, especially on the technical front, and while I do think that they very much deserve the praise they receive, I can see some ways that people might not like them and even find them emulating other story formulas. Like Klaus for following the selfish jerk gets sent on a journey where he learns humbleness and the importance of caring for others, and Spider-Verse being another coming-of-age story where the protagonist ultimately has to accept his destiny and responsibility, basically a staple of the bulk majority of superhero films. Basically, what I'm saying here is that there are only so many tropes that one movie, show, or game can break free of. So I think it's unrealistic to put all our expectations onto any one single product like it's going to be the ultimate game changer. After all, when sound in film was revolutionary in the late 20s, it was still a developing technology that had to be slowly integrated, and several films for the time, The Man Who Laughs being one example that comes to my recent memory, could only include a few bits of sound throughout its duration and could be removed in case of theaters that couldn't project the sound. In any case, you're inevitably going to get just one person or another who doesn't think your favorite movie of all time is worthy of the recognition. We know that it's virtually impossible to create something that appeals to absolutely every person on the planet, and this is true of animated films too. For example, my sister isn't a fan of The Iron Giant because she thinks it follows too many of the same story beats as the likes of E.T. and numerous other stories about alien-like beings finding themselves among human civilization and befriending a kid who understands them and wants to protect them from mankind's lack of understanding. And I know people who hate Spirited Away because the bizarreness and outlandishness of its world and characters is just too alienating for them. And if ever any of the hardcore fans of these types of movies find so much as one person who doesn't like this thing that is universally praised, that person is either harassed or just disregarded like they are some sort of societal outcast. I speak from experience as someone who isn't the biggest fan of Star Wars. And I don't think it's very practical to declare that every animated film should be like Klaus or Spider-Verse. I would be thrilled to get more films that are as innovative as those ones for sure, but I also recognize that those kinds of gems take time to develop, more time than mainstream films typically have to be put together. And in an age where we are fortunate enough to get over a dozen animated films this year, especially with access to indie projects, there are at least a few of them, among all the rubble, that are striving to reach above the norm. Usually if they're big names like Pixar, but there are other examples that you just gotta look a little harder to find, like Laika. And while I too have tendency to feel a surge of serial killer levels of anger whenever I hear people being dismissive of animation as a whole, as if they're allergic to the medium or something, I realize that I have to keep things in perspective and not lash out at said people. Because I realize that attacking your detractors will not help your case, and it will only make you look worse as a fan of this underappreciated art form, thus alienating outsiders to the medium even further. We want to argue with highly respected figures like how Roger Ebert said that video games will never be considered high art, and Lord knows I've disagreed on a number of occasions with highly reputable names in my field of interest. To change minds, you need to leave behind the contempt and show open-mindedness yourself. Don't treat these detractors like they're the devil, because in the end, even if they have a big voice, they are not the definitive voice. Back onto the topic with how to reason with someone who still believes that animation and video games are for kids. The sad truth is that we can keep re-emphasizing the notion all we want, and we can keep bringing up examples to prove otherwise, and we can keep being vocal about it until we're blue in the face. And yet, for all the good that it will do in spite of that, we might as well be talking to a brick wall. You can try and reason with these people all you want, but they'll just turn their heads up at that claim like how British kings dismissed early American colonists' claims of all men being created equal as a folly. But in light of the recent COPPA ordeal on YouTube and the fact that the FTC appealed to it so that videos wouldn't get automatically flagged as for kids just because they feature animation, gaming, toys, or child celebrities, it did call to my attention one defense that might prove more effective if we resort to that. The next time you run into anyone who says that a medium or art form is for kids, instead of trying to appeal to their personal tastes and opinions, where your chances of success are tumultuous, try instead challenging them with undisputable facts. One such example would be, every mass-distributed piece of media of entertainment that is made for kids, or even presumed to be made for kids in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, is made by adults. Adults who have experience in handling money that they raise to fund and invest these high-risk projects and pay the people who put forth their skills to bringing these projects into fruition. Adults who are passing the torch to later generations, particularly students who are at college level, mind you, and teach them via video tutorials, video essays, and thought pieces. Which, given the fact that there are animation courses in college, should tell you in and of itself how vast and diverse the market is. Adults who have taken courses in learning not just how to write stories and create images for a game or show or what have you, but also thoroughly educated themselves about the topic they're writing about and the history of their medium, much of which depicts a lot of non-child-friendly details. In the case of animation, that means such things as a whole history that involves topics like racial insensitivity and lack of political correctness, which future animators need to learn about for better representation in future media. And in the case of gaming, that means things like understanding the designs and mechanics of real-world weaponry to create fantastical weaponry for first-person shooter games. If I was a comic book artist who was being berated or mocked by my uncle for still reading comic books and just look at the images and dismiss it as for kids, I would ask him a simple question. How well can you draw? Do you have any idea how much training, studying, and financial investment over how many years it takes to get down the basics of drawing and build up those hand muscles so that there are virtually no mistakes in the line work? If you think that I'm replaceable with a machine, keep in mind which one needs the most repairs and updates, as well as which ones won't age well with time. Even technology has human hands that tell what they want the artwork to look like. Admittedly, challenging the mindset of people who question your talent and worth does have the potential to come off as a too quirky or fallacious appeal to success, but I say that you are fully in your right to call these people out if what they're technically saying is you've got no talent or that your field has no worth when you clearly have a market for it. And if they aren't willing to acknowledge the value and worth of your talent, then they don't deserve you, and they don't deserve to even be acknowledged in the same conversation. My mother gave me some very wise words from her life experience. If people are trying to persuade you to sell yourself short as an artist, don't buy into it. If you play your cards right, it doesn't mean that you'll eliminate members of your audience like it may sound at first, but rather you'll target it on an audience who recognizes you for your worth and will praise you and pay you for it, and you will be able to expand your audience from there. And I think that's the best method of garnering respect for the art of animation and gaming, or just any art form that has to build up an audience in general. You make a product that you target to a specific audience and gradually build it up, and you will become successful. Admittedly, it's a hard thing to do, which is unfortunately why so many mainstream media panders to the lowest common denominator. But like I said before, with so many products coming out each year, there's bound to be at least one that stands out from the crowd in its own unique way. It might not shatter people's perceptions of the cinema or gaming right off the bat, because, let's face it, the majority of the rest of the world have lives outside of the media they consume, but if it stands up well enough in its own merits, then it will make a big enough impact on the life of at least one person outside of the nerd circle. Someone who will bring it up on something like TED Talks, or maybe even something like this article I'll link below titled, The Mythoposis of Frozen 2, Cosmogony and Ethics. Thank you so much for watching this video. Comments are very much appreciated, especially if you have anything to add or correct me on. But really, since YouTube is on the verge of changing and I don't know whether these videos will still be up by next year, the best thing that you can do to support this video is to share it with someone you know, or take my words and pass them along wherever you can. Merry Christmas to all of you, and here's looking forward to 2020.